Can I come back to the question about that I made earlier about the homeless people who are on your housing lists who have received a notice to quit, and the notice to quit is because the owner is selling. Can you tell me if you have advised your housing officers to ask the applicant if the landlord is selling, if the landlord will sell to the local authority? Is that something you've instructed your housing officers to do so far? And if not, is it something you will instruct your housing officers to do? I appreciate it's a long journey and there's many factors then that go into the ultimate decision, and there's criteria that has to be met. In terms of the traveller accommodation, just for Fingal, I'm very familiar with the Fingal boundary there towards Ashtown and Dublin Central and that. And just a comment I'd make is that it appears that site on the Rathote Road there, it's a really bad road, that stretch of road, from once you come up from Riley's Bridge up towards Kappa Hospital. It's a dangerous road for anybody to be living on it or entering on it. Wouldn't be great. The halting site, the traveller site there, hasn't got a good, safe entrance onto that road. It's very dangerous. It's very unsightly. And if it is something you could maybe come back to me with a report on just what your plans are for that. I don't need a specific answer today. In terms of the housing lists, I think both of you indicated an average time historically of about 6 to 7 years from when somebody applies to your local authority for housing to actually being housed. And in the interim period, that 6 or 7 years, I'm assuming, but I'd like you to confirm, that all of your applicants receive housing assistance payment, and so they're being accommodated in private rented accommodation. And it's only if then the private rental accommodation is being sold up that they actually receive a notice to quit, that they potentially face homelessness. So in facing the homelessness then, I guess the question I would come back to is the value for money question between a family being put into emergency homeless accommodation at a cost of 70 or 80,000 a year versus the long-term leasing solution. And from my experience in the city, long-term leasing are brand new energy rated apartments and homes that have been built to the highest standards. They're often furnished. They're a long-term lease of somewhere between 15 and 25 years, which if I take your cost of 300,000 works out at a cost of about 12 grand a year. So I suppose I want to know, is that a fair description of what is happening in Fingal and South County Dublin? If your local authorities use long-term leasing, and if it is the case, are you really comfortable with eliminating long-term leasing over the next 5 to 6 years? And then my final question to you is, how are your local authorities being impacted by the arrival of Ukrainians and international protection refugees? Thank you. You can start with South County, sorry, and then Fingal.
And certainly he has some of the detail in relation to how we view leasing and what we've been involved in. I think your cost comparison between someone being in 25-year emergency accommodation, I hope that wouldn't happen, and 25-year lease, as a value for money proposition is clearly the result.
But even if it was 5 years,
the result is pretty obvious. I think where the conversation broke down was understanding from a state's perspective the value for money around giving private funding a 5-6% return on their investment, as to whether or not that money could have been available through NTMA or whatever. That was one part of the discussion, and the other part was, should we have something at the end of it? I'd be in that stable, perfectly frankly, myself, and I wouldn't mind paying. I would be comfortable with the state paying.
You would defend
a higher premium on the understanding that you were going to realise an asset at the end of it.
Yeah.
On the Ukrainian refugee thing, and if you want specific questions, Colin, on the Ukrainian refugee thing, obviously, City West is on our patch, and the story of that is it's in it's national media. They've been under immense pressure out there. We work with South Dublin Partnership. We have funded some posts to work directly with the Ukrainian community on site. We work with the South Dublin Volunteer Centre, who've been out there from the very beginning, doing incredible work. Some of it can be very emotionally trying for volunteers looking on while people have to hold over for periods of time. So look, I think there's everyone is mindful of the challenge, but also mindful of the need to transition from an emergency into a more long-term integrated solution for people, because the clustering of people at City West or in hotels, whatever, it sounds ridiculous to say it, but it has a value initially in terms of collective supports, DSP supports, education supports, health supports in the one place, early interventions in relation to English language learning, but it can't be like this in terms of hotels.
It perpetuates a trauma.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we do need to look at a more broader sustainable solution and a disaggregation of that clustering, and what that looks like obviously is under consideration by the government. I'm reading today's headlines and I see where some of the early thoughts are around that, and that's to be welcomed. But we do, I suppose, suffer from understanding what the figures are going to look like into the future.
Yep.
Because early days it was identified with certain airports and there was a certain trajectory. It's now more dissipated across Europe, and the origin points of origin and the entry points are more dispersed, and it's harder to predict. So yes, the work done so far has been fantastic, but it's a continuing challenge.
Okay, Gurmagad.